Most people assume that if their retirement plan worked on paper, it will work in real life. They ran the projections. They followed the averages. They used reasonable assumptions. So when anxiety shows up anyway, they feel confused. Because the numbers say they should be fine. But emotionally, they don't feel fine at all. If that sounds familiar, it's not because you did something wrong. It's because one of the most common retirement planning assumptions is quietly flawed. And most people don't realize it until retirement is already underway. The assumption is simple, that retirement will behave like a smooth, predictable extension of the working years, that spending will be steady, that markets will average out, that risk will feel manageable as long as the math works. But retirement doesn't work that way. It's not a straight line. It's a long period of change. People age, health changes, expenses shift, energy levels rise and fall. And yet many retirement plans are built as if none of that will happen. They rely heavily on averages, average returns, average inflation, average spending. Averages make planning feel neat. But real life doesn't live at the average. It moves around it, sometimes dramatically. This is where many retirement plans start to feel fragile, not because the assumptions were irresponsible, but because they were incomplete. One of the biggest misunderstandings is how spending actually works in retirement. Most plans assume a flat spending rate adjusted slightly for inflation. In reality, spending is uneven. Early retirement often includes higher discretionary spending. Later years often include higher healthcare costs. Some years bring unexpected expenses. Plans built on smooth spending don't reflect this reality. When spending deviates from the plan, people feel like they're doing something wrong. They aren't. The plan simply didn't account for variability. Another flawed assumption is that risk feels the same throughout retirement. It doesn't. Market volatility feels very different when you're withdrawing income. Losses early in retirement feel heavier than losses later, not because the percentage change is larger, but because recovery time is shorter. Plans that treat all years equally miss this emotional reality. This is why people who thought they had a solid plan suddenly feel uneasy after a market downturn. The math may still work, but confidence doesn't. Another common assumption is that flexibility will always be available, that if something changes, adjustments can be made easily. But flexibility often decreases over time. Options narrow. Income sources become fixed. Spending becomes less adjustable. Health limits choices. Plans that assume constant flexibility create false confidence early on. When flexibility fades, stress increases. I've worked with retirees who were shocked by how quickly options felt limited. They didn't expect that. They assumed they could adapt later. But adaptation is easier earlier than later. This is why planning assumptions matter so much. They shape expectations. When expectations don't match reality, anxiety fills the gap. Another overlooked issue is taxes. Many plans assume stable or predictable tax treatment. But taxes interact with income, withdrawals, and benefits in complex ways. Small changes in income can trigger larger consequences. Social Security taxation, Medicare premium adjustments, bracket changes. These interactions rarely appear clearly in early planning projections. When they show up later, they feel like surprises. Not because they're unusual, but because they weren't anticipated. There's also the assumption that confidence naturally increases once retirement begins. That once the decision is made, peace follows. For many people, the opposite happens. Uncertainty increases. Without a paycheck, every decision feels more permanent. Even well-funded retirees can feel exposed. This emotional shift is rarely included in planning conversations, but it has real consequences. It affects spending behavior. It affects investment decisions. It affects quality of life. Part of the problem is that most planning tools are designed to answer one question: can I afford to retire? But retirement raises different questions. How do I spend this money wisely? How do I protect against things I can't predict? How do I stay flexible when circumstances change? Those questions require different frameworks. They're not about reaching a number. They're about managing uncertainty over decades. And most planning conversations stop before those topics even begin. This leaves retirees with a plan that got them to retirement, but not through it. The transition catches people off guard. They thought the hard part was saving. They didn't realize the harder part might be managing what they saved. That shift from accumulation to distribution is more complex than it appears. During working years, mistakes can often be corrected with time, extra contributions, delayed retirement, career adjustments. In retirement, correction mechanisms are limited. You can't easily go back to work. You can't undo withdrawals. You can't recapture time. That permanence changes how every decision feels. It adds weight to choices that used to feel reversible. Another assumption that breaks down is the idea that more money automatically means less stress. For some retirees, that's true. But for others, having significant assets creates new anxieties, worries about losing it, concerns about managing it correctly, pressure to make it last, guilt about spending it. These emotional layers aren't addressed in most planning models. The models assume people will simply spend according to the plan. But human behavior is more complicated than that. Some retirees underspend out of fear. Some overspend out of denial. Some freeze and do nothing. The assumptions don't account for these psychological patterns. They assume rational, consistent behavior. But retirement decisions are rarely purely rational. They're influenced by past experiences, by family history, by stories people tell themselves about money and security. When those influences aren't acknowledged, plans feel disconnected from the person they're meant to serve. The numbers work, but the person doesn't trust them. The projections look fine, but the retiree still feels vulnerable. This disconnect is one of the most common sources of retirement anxiety. Not a lack of resources, but a lack of alignment between the plan and the person. The retirees who feel most comfortable usually share one trait. Their plans acknowledge uncertainty instead of hiding it. They expect variability. They plan for uneven spending. They prepare for emotional reactions, not just financial ones. Their plans aren't rigid. They're resilient. Resilient plans don't depend on everything going right. They allow room for adjustment. They separate essentials from optional spending. They include buffers for unexpected events. They focus on income reliability, not just portfolio size. This approach doesn't eliminate risk, but it makes risk manageable. When retirees understand which assumptions are fragile and which are flexible, anxiety decreases. They stop reacting to every deviation. They start responding with perspective. This is why retirement planning is not about predicting the future accurately. It's about preparing for uncertainty realistically. The biggest mistake is assuming certainty exists. It doesn't. But confidence can still exist. Confidence comes from understanding trade-offs, from knowing where flexibility lives, from accepting that plans evolve. It comes from recognizing that retirement is not a finish line. It's a journey that requires ongoing attention, not constant worry, but periodic reassessment. The retirees who navigate this best treat their plan as a living document, not a final answer. They revisit assumptions as circumstances change. They adjust when reality diverges from projection. They stay engaged without becoming obsessed. That balance is difficult to strike, but it's essential because disengagement creates blind spots and obsession creates unnecessary stress. The goal is informed awareness, knowing enough to make good decisions, trusting the structure enough to live without constant monitoring. When that balance exists, retirement feels different. Not perfect, not stress-free, but manageable, sustainable, and ultimately more enjoyable. Because the purpose of planning is not to eliminate all uncertainty, it's to reduce it to a level that allows life to be lived fully. In future videos, we'll explore how retirees redesign plans when assumptions break down, how flexibility is rebuilt over time, and how confidence returns even when outcomes differ from expectations. No fear, no pressure, just clarity. Because retirement success isn't about being right about everything, it's about being prepared for change.